Desert Discovery, a truth unearthed. The Arizona sun streamed through the kitchen windows, casting long rectangles of light across the breakfast table, where Marissa Green sat with her husband David. It was a typical morning in Chandler, Arizona, or at least as typical as mornings had been for the past 20 years, ever since their twin daughters disappeared without a trace. Marissa stirred her coffee absently, her thoughts drifting as they often did to April and Amber. The girls would be 34 now. What would they look like? Would they have children of their own? These questions haunted her daily, though. She'd learned to live with the not knowing. The sudden vibration of her phone against the wooden table startled her. She glanced down, expecting to see a work colleague, or perhaps one of her friends from the grief support group. Instead, she froze. The name Detective Holbrook illuminated her screen. "David," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's Detective Holbrook." David's head snapped up from his newspaper, eyes wide with disbelief. Detective Liam Holbrook had been the lead investigator on their daughter's case, a case that had gone cold years ago despite the media coverage and extensive searches. "Answer it," David urged, setting down his coffee mug with a trembling hand. Marissa swiped to accept the call, her heart thundering against her ribcage. "Hello, Mrs. Green?" Detective Holbrook's deep voice resonated through the speaker. "I hope I'm not disturbing your morning." "Not at all," Marissa replied, placing the call on speaker so David could hear. Is everything okay?" "Have a significant update about your daughter's case," the detective said, his tone measured but with an undercurrent of urgency that made Marissa's stomach clench. "What kind of update?" she asked, her voice breaking slightly. After 20 years of silence, any development seemed impossible. "Have you found—" "I can't explain everything over the phone," Detective Holbrook interrupted gently. "Could you and your husband come down to the station? The sooner the better." David leaned forward. "We'll be there immediately," he assured the detective. "Thank you. I'll be waiting." The call ended, leaving the kitchen in silence. For a moment, neither of them moved, as if afraid that any sudden action might shatter this fragile moment of possibility. "Do you think—" Marissa couldn't finish the question, couldn't voice the hope that was swelling dangerously within her. David reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves, but whatever it is, we'll face it together." They rose from the table with newfound energy, abandoning their half-eaten breakfast. Marissa grabbed her purse while David collected his wallet and keys. Within 5 minutes, they were backing out of their driveway, the morning sun warming the car's interior as they drove toward the Chandler Police Department. "It's been so long," Marissa murmured, staring out the window at the city that had changed so much in 20 years. New buildings, expanded highways, a place their daughters wouldn't recognize. "I never thought we'd hear from Detective Holbrook again." David nodded, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. No, I've tried to move on, but some part of me never stopped waiting for this call." The police station parking lot was more crowded than usual. As they pulled into a vacant spot, Marissa recognized several other vehicles, cars belonging to the parents of the other missing cheerleaders. Her heart rate quickened. "The others are here too," she whispered. Inside the station, the familiar smell of coffee and cleaning supplies greeted them. The receptionist recognized them immediately, offering a sympathetic smile as she directed them to a conference room down the hall. When they entered, they found 4 other sets of parents already seated around a large table. Detective Holbrook stood at the front of the room, his formerly dark hair now streaked with gray, the lines around his eyes deeper than Marissa remembered. "Mr. and Mrs. Green," he acknowledged them with a nod. "Please have a seat." As they settled into the remaining chairs, Marissa exchanged glances with the other parents, Linda and Robert Thompson, whose daughter Kira had disappeared alongside the twins, Judith and Michael Lee, Hannah's parents, Susan Collins, mother of Rachel, and Peter and Elena Rivera, Lily's parents. All of them connected by the same terrible event, the same 2-decade-long nightmare. Detective Holbrook cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming so quickly. As I mentioned on the phone, we have a significant development in your daughter's case." He paused, his expression solemn. Early this morning, a hiker deep in the Sonoran Desert discovered something we believe is connected to your daughter's disappearance. He turned to a laptop on the table and clicked a few keys. An image appeared on the wall screen, a rusty metal suitcase, partially buried in sand beneath a large, flat stone. The lid was open, revealing a pile of red and white fabric inside. Cheerleading uniforms, Susan Collins whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. Marissa leaned forward, straining to see details in the photograph. The red fabric, though dusty and faded, was unmistakable. Identical to the uniforms her daughters had worn the night they vanished. Detective Holbrook continued. The hiker was with his dog when he made the discovery. They were exploring an area far from the usual hiking trails. Not many people pass through there. His dog caught a scent and began digging. That's when he found the suitcase. Where exactly was this? David asked, his voice steady despite the emotion Marissa could see in his eyes. About 30 miles outside of Chandler, in a remote section of desert. The detective clicked to another image, a wider shot showing the barren landscape surrounding the discovery site. We've already sent a forensic team to process the area. We need to go there, Marissa stated firmly, surprising herself with her own determination. I need to see the place myself. Other parents murmured in agreement, nodding urgently. Detective Holbrook frowned. That's not necessary. We're bringing the suitcase and its contents back to the lab for analysis. The hiker is coming in later today to give a formal statement. Please, Linda Thompson implored. After 20 years of not knowing, we need to see this with our own eyes. The detective looked around at their faces, then sighed. I'll need to check with the field team first. He stepped out of the room, phone in hand. While he was gone, the parents exchanged theories in hushed voices. Marissa could hardly focus on their words. Her mind was racing with possibilities. Those uniforms had to have been placed there recently. Why now, after all this time? Detective Holbrook returned several minutes later. The field team says you can come to the site, but you'll need to follow protocol. Stay behind the tape, don't touch anything, and follow instructions from officers on scene. Relief washed over Marissa. Thank you. We'll follow you there, David added. The detective nodded. We'll leave in 15 minutes. The drive takes about an hour. As they filed out of the conference room, Marissa felt a strange mix of dread and hope. 20 years of wondering might finally come to an end today. She squeezed David's hand as they walked to their car, a silent reminder that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. The convoy of vehicles left Chandler under the late morning sun, Detective Holbrook's unmarked police car leading the way, followed by 5 civilian vehicles carrying parents desperate for answers. Marissa watched the urban landscape gradually give way to desert scrub, her thoughts turning to the night her daughters disappeared. It had been a regional cheerleading competition. April and Amber, 14 years old and vibrant with life, had performed brilliantly with their squad. The girls had called home after their performance, elated about their second-place finish. They promised to call again when they were heading home. That call never came. By the time they reached the desert site, the sun was high overhead, casting harsh shadows across the rugged terrain. They parked in a makeshift lot alongside several police vehicles and followed Detective Holbrook on foot for nearly half a mile, walking in silence across the hard-packed earth. A white tent had been erected at the site, surrounded by yellow crime scene tape. Several officers and forensic technicians moved around the area methodically. As they approached, Marissa saw a man standing off to the side with a medium-sized dog on a leash, the hiker who had made the discovery. Detective Holbrook gestured toward him. This is Chris Delaney, the man who found the suitcase, and that's his dog, Dusty. Chris stepped forward, extending his hand. He appeared to be in his early 40s with sun-weathered skin and kind eyes. I wish we were meeting under better circumstances, he said, as he shook hands with each of the parents. Thank you for finding this, Marissa told him, her voice thick with emotion. You have no idea what it means to us. Chris nodded, his expression somber. Dusty deserves most of the credit. He caught the scent and wouldn't leave it alone, started digging like crazy, The dog, an Australian Shepherd Labrador mix with intelligent eyes, sat obediently at his owner's feet. "Can we see it?" David asked, looking toward the tent. Detective Holbrook led them under the canvas shelter, where the suitcase now sat, on a folding table. Even from a distance, Marissa could see the red and white fabric of the cheerleading uniforms, neatly folded but showing signs of age and exposure. A forensic technician explained, "Based on the condition of the uniforms and the suitcase itself, we believe they were buried here relatively recently, perhaps within the last year or so." "Recently?" Peter Rivera questioned. "But our daughters disappeared 20 years ago." "That's what makes this discovery so unusual," Detective Holbrook admitted. "It appears that whoever hid these uniforms did so in a hurry. The burial was shallow, and the stone covering wasn't particularly heavy, almost as if they expected no one to venture this far into the desert." As the parents gathered around the table for a closer look at the evidence that might finally lead them to their daughters, Marissa noticed movement in the distance, vehicles approaching. One was a news van with a local station's logo emblazoned on its side. Another was a sedan that looked vaguely familiar. When the sedan parked and its driver stepped out, Marissa felt a jolt of recognition. Vincent Caraway, the girls' former cheerleading coach, strode toward them with purpose in his step. He had aged since she'd last seen him, his once dark hair now silver at the temples, but his athletic build and confident gait were unchanged. "Marissa, David," he called out as he approached. "I came as soon as I heard." Detective Holbrook stepped forward to greet Caraway, extending his hand. "Coach, thank you for coming so quickly." Caraway shook the detective's hand firmly. "Of course, when it concerns my girls, I drop everything." Marissa noticed how he still referred to the cheerleaders as his girls, even after 2 decades. Caraway had been deeply involved in the search efforts back then, using his connections and resources to keep the investigation going long after the police had begun to scale back their efforts. "We've decided to inform the media about this new development," Detective Holbrook explained to the gathered parents. "This case affected our entire community 20 years ago. Hundreds of volunteers joined the search parties. People deserve to know we found something." Marissa watched as reporters began setting up their equipment nearby. A young woman with a microphone was already speaking with one of the officers, nodding intently at whatever information she was receiving. Vincent Caraway approached the table where the suitcase sat. He stared down at the uniforms, his expression unreadable. "After all these years," he murmured, "I've never stopped hoping we'd find them." He turned to Chris Delaney, who still stood with his dog near the edge of the tent. "Thank you," he said earnestly, extending his hand to the hiker. "Your discovery might finally help us find answers." Caraway then moved among the parents, greeting each with a warm handshake or a gentle touch on the shoulder. When he reached Marissa and David, his eyes softened. "It's been a long time," he said quietly. "How are you holding up?" "As well as can be expected," David replied. "We heard you're no longer with the school." Caraway nodded. "I left the school system about 10 years ago. I still train cheerleaders independently, though. Started my own program." Before they could continue their conversation, a reporter approached, cameraman in tow. "We'd like to interview the parents, if that's all right," she said, looking to Detective Holbrook for permission. The detective nodded. "One at a time, please, and keep it brief." The interviews began, with each set of parents expressing their renewed hope that this discovery might lead to finding their daughters, or at least learning what had happened to them. Marissa watched as Susan Collins broke down mid-sentence, overcome with emotion as she spoke about her daughter Rachel. When it was their turn, Marissa and David stood before the camera, holding hands for support. "Mrs. Green, how does it feel to have this new lead after 20 years?" the reporter asked. Marissa took a deep breath. "It's overwhelming. We've never stopped looking for our daughters, never stopped hoping. If April and Amber are out there somewhere, if they can see this broadcast, we want them to know that we're still searching. We will never stop looking for you. Mr. Green, what do you hope comes from this discovery?" David's voice was steady, though Marissa could feel his hand trembling in hers. "Closure, at the very least. But what we really hope for is what every parent in our situation hopes for: to find our children alive and bring them home." After the interview concluded, Marissa realized she'd left her water bottle and camera in the car. "I should go get them," she told David. "I want to take some pictures of this place with my good camera. My phone won't capture enough detail." "I'll come with you," David offered. They approached Detective Holbrook to let him know their plans. "That's fine," he said, "but stay on the path we came in on. It's easy to get disoriented out here in the desert, and we don't need any more missing persons today." They nodded in understanding and began the walk back to the parking area. The midday sun beat down on them, the heat rising invisible, waves from the sandy ground. As they walked, Marissa scanned the surrounding landscape, taking in the vast emptiness of the desert. Something on the horizon caught her eye. A truck, partially obscured by a ridge, and what appeared to be two men moving around it. One seemed to be dragging something heavy toward the vehicle, while the other was crouched behind a large cactus near some rocks. "David," she whispered, touching his arm to stop him. "Look over there." David followed her gaze. "I see them. There's someone sitting in the truck, too." "What are they doing out here?" Marissa wondered aloud. "That's too far from any trail for normal hikers." David squinted against the sun. "They're probably just taking a break from off-roading or something." Marissa shook her head, her instincts telling her something wasn't right. Why would someone be dragging a heavy sack if they're just taking a break? And what's that other man doing by those rocks? Without waiting for David's response, she altered her course, heading toward the distant truck. "Marissa," David hissed, hurrying after her. "What are you doing? The detective said to stay on the path." "I just want to see what they're up to," she replied, her pace quickening. "Something doesn't feel right." David caught up to her, grabbing her arm gently. "This is dangerous. We should tell Detective Holbrook instead." "By the time we get back to him, they could be gone," Marissa argued, pulling away. "I need to know if this has anything to do with our daughters." As they drew closer, the men by the truck noticed them. Marissa raised her hand in greeting, calling out, "Hello there." The reaction was immediate and alarming. The men shouted to each other, abandoning whatever they had been doing. The man who had been dragging the sack heaved it into the truck bed, while the one by the rocks rushed toward the vehicle with what looked like a shovel in his hands. Within moments, all three men were in the truck, which roared to life and sped away, kicking up a cloud of dust in its wake. "Did you see that?" Marissa exclaimed. "They ran away." In the final seconds before the truck disappeared from view, Marissa noticed a small sticker on the rear window, some kind of company logo. Instinctively, she grabbed her phone and tried to take a picture, but the truck was moving too fast and was already too far away. The resulting image was a blurry mess. "That was a company logo on the back window," she told David, her heart racing. "Did you see it?" David nodded grimly. "I saw it, but I didn't recognize it." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the dust trail left by the departing truck until it vanished in the distance. Then, driven by curiosity and a mother's intuition, Marissa walked toward the spot where the men had been. "Marissa, we need to go back," David urged, following reluctantly. "We're way outside the safety zone now." "Just a little farther," she insisted. "I need to see what they were doing." When they reached the large cactus and the nearby rocks, Marissa crouched down to examine the ground. There was a freshly dug hole, similar to the one where the suitcase had been found. David joined her, scanning the disturbed earth carefully. "There's something here," he said suddenly, reaching into the sand. He pulled out a small object, brushing away the dust that clung to it. Marissa gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God, David, that's Amber's earring." She took the small piece of jewelry from his palm with trembling fingers. Though tarnished and corroded after years in the desert, there was no mistaking the distinctive design. A tiny silver star with a red gem at its center. She had bought identical pairs for both twins on their 13th birthday, just months before. "They disappeared. Are you sure?" David asked, his voice barely audible. Marissa nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I'm positive. I gave these to them for their birthday." She looked up at him, a mixture of hope and fear coursing through her. "David, these men, they must know something about what happened to our girls." They searched the area thoroughly, hoping to find more clues, but the men had been thorough in their removal of whatever else might have been buried there. With the earring clutched tightly in her hand, Marissa finally agreed to return to the investigation site. "We need to tell Detective Holbrook right away," she said as they made their way back. "Those men could be the key to finding our daughters." When they returned to the tent, Detective Holbrook was deep in conversation with a forensic technician. The other parents were scattered around the site, some speaking with officers, others simply watching the ongoing investigation with anxious expressions. "Detective," Marissa called out urgently as they approached, "we need to speak with you immediately." Detective Holbrook excused himself from the technician and turned to them, his expression shifting to concern when he saw their faces. "What happened?" "We found something," David explained, gesturing for Marissa to show the earring. She held out her palm, revealing the tarnished piece of jewelry. "This is Amber's earring, I'm certain of it. I gave identical pairs to both girls for their 13th birthday." The detective frowned, taking the earring to examine it more closely. "Where did you find this?" Marissa and David exchanged glances before David answered. "About half a mile from here. We saw 3 men by a truck. One was dragging something that looked like a heavy sack, and another was digging near some rocks. When they noticed us, they fled," Marissa added quickly. "We went to the spot where they'd been digging and found the earring in the sand." Detective Holbrook's frown deepened. "You went after 3 unknown men in a remote desert. Location? Do you have any idea how dangerous that was?" "We know," David acknowledged, "but we couldn't just let them drive away without investigating." "These might be the guys who buried the suitcase," Marissa said firmly. "They could be checking their hiding spots after finding out the police have been here all morning, and they might be getting rid of other evidence right now." By now, the other parents had gathered around, listening intently to the conversation. Vincent Carraway pushed through the small crowd, his expression grave. "What's going on?" he asked, looking between Marissa and the detective. Detective Holbrook held up the earring. "The Greens found this near where they spotted 3 men acting suspiciously. Mrs. Green believes it belonged to her daughter, Amber." Carraway's eyes widened slightly as he looked at the jewelry. "That does look like the earrings the girls used to wear. Did you get a good look at these men?" Detective Holbrook asked, turning back to Marissa and David. "Would you recognize them if you saw them again?" "It was too far to see their faces clearly, but I think I remember the shape of one of their faces and what they were wearing," David admitted. "I did notice a company logo on the truck's rear window, though." "A logo?" The detective reached for his notepad. "Did you recognize it?" Marissa shook her head. "Not clearly, but I tried to take a picture." She pulled out her phone and showed him the blurry image. "It's not much help, I'm afraid." "Could you draw what you remember?" Detective Holbrook asked, handing her the notepad and a pen. Marissa took them hesitantly. "I'm not much of an artist, but I'll try." She began sketching, her brow furrowed in concentration as she attempted to recreate the logo she'd glimpsed on the truck's window. After a minute, she handed the notepad back. It was something like this: a stylized bird, maybe a phoenix, with its wings spread around 3 letters, C, P, and F. Linda Thompson, who had been listening quietly, suddenly stepped forward. "CPF? That sounds like Carraway Performance and Fitness Group." All eyes turned to Vincent Carraway, whose expression remained calm. "Carraway Performance and Fitness," Detective Holbrook repeated, looking at the coach questioningly. Marissa's heart began to race. Could the cheerleading coach somehow be connected to their daughter's disappearance? Carraway held up his hands defensively. "My company sponsored the cheerleading team 20 years ago, and we funded most of the search operations after the girls disappeared. We were completely transparent during the investigation." "It's true," Detective Holbrook confirmed, addressing the parents. "Coach Carraway's company was extensively vetted during the original investigation. They provided financial support and volunteers when the official search was scaled back." "Did you get the truck's license plate number?" he asked Marissa and David. "There wasn't one," David replied. "At least not that we could see." "No plate?" The detective made a note. "That's suspicious in itself." Michael Lee, Hannah's father, had been trying to sketch the logo as well. He held up his drawing. "Would it have looked something like this?" he asked Marissa. His sketch showed a stylized bird with outstretched wings encircling the letters CPF in bold type. It was remarkably similar to what Marissa had been trying to describe. Yes, she confirmed. Very much like that. That is definitely similar to my old company logo, Caraway admitted, studying the drawing. But as I said, I sold that company 20 years ago before the girls disappeared. Sold it? Detective Holbrook raised an eyebrow. To whom? A businessman named Matthew Rance, Caraway replied. He kept me on as a consultant for a while, which is why the company remained associated with me during the search operations. But I haven't had any official connection to CPF for nearly 2 decades now. Detective Holbrook made another note. I'll need the details of that sale and current contact information for Mr. Rance. Of course, Caraway agreed readily. Anything that might help find the girls. In the meantime, the detective continued, turning to Marissa and David. Can you show us exactly where you saw these men and found the earring? Yes, David said. It's not far from here. I'd like to check for tire tracks, Detective Holbrook explained. If they left in a hurry, they might have left a trail we can follow. Marissa nodded eagerly. That's what I was thinking. The desert road they took isn't frequently used. Their tire marks might still be visible. The detective considered this, then nodded. I'll send a team to investigate the area and follow any tracks we find. But I need you two to stay here or head back to the station. This could be dangerous. We understand, David said, though Marissa looked like she wanted to protest. But we'd like to at least watch from a distance. After a moment's hesitation, Detective Holbrook agreed. You can wait at the base camp we've set up, but that's as far as you go. I mean it, he added, fixing them with a stern look. No more solo expeditions. As the detective gathered a small team of officers for the investigation, Chris Delaney approached with his dog, Dusty. I know the area pretty well, he offered. I could help guide your team. Detective Holbrook shook his head. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Delaney, but we can't risk civilian involvement at this stage. The hiker nodded in understanding. Of course. Just thought I'd offer. Marissa reached out to touch his arm. Thank you anyway. And thank you again for finding the suitcase. Without you and Dusty, we might never have gotten this far. Chris smiled softly. Just glad I could help. Detective Holbrook directed an officer to escort Marissa, David, and the other parents back to the base camp, offering them the option to wait at a nearby diner for updates from the investigation team. As they walked away, Marissa passed the earring to the detective, who carefully sealed it inside an evidence bag. We'll find out what happened to your daughters, he promised. One way or another. Marissa nodded, hoping desperately that he was right. After 20 years of uncertainty, they were finally close to answers. She could feel it. She just prayed those answers wouldn't break her heart all over again. The drive back to civilization felt interminable. Marissa stared out the window at the passing desert landscape, her mind racing with possibilities. Who were those men? What had they been doing in the desert? And most importantly, what did they know about April and Amber? We should eat something, David suggested as they approached a small cluster of buildings, a gas station, a diner, and what looked like a general store. It could be hours before we hear anything from Detective Holbrook. Marissa nodded absently. Food was the last thing on her mind, but she knew David was right. They needed to keep their strength up for whatever lay ahead. They pulled into the diner's parking lot, a dusty patch of gravel with a few vehicles scattered about. The neon open sign buzzed in the window, a cheerful contrast to the desolate surroundings. Inside, the diner was cool and dim after the bright desert sun. It had the typical small-town charm, red vinyl booths, a counter with spinning stools, and the smell of coffee and grilled onions hanging in the air. A few locals sat at the counter, nursing cups of coffee and engaged in quiet conversation. Marissa and David chose a booth in the back corner, where they could talk privately while keeping an eye on the door. A middle-aged waitress approached, with a pot of coffee and 2 menus. Afternoon, folks, she greeted them warmly. Coffee while you decide? Please, David replied, turning his cup right side up. After the waitress filled their cups and took their lunch orders, a club sandwich for David and a bowl of soup for Marissa, they sat in silence for a moment, both lost in their own thoughts. "I can't believe we found Amber's earring after all this time," Marissa said finally, her voice low. "It can't be a coincidence." David wrapped his hands around his coffee mug, as if seeking comfort from its warmth. "I know, but we need to let the police do their job, Marissa. These men could be dangerous." Marissa leaned forward, her eyes intense. "But what if the police don't find them? What if those men know where our daughters are, and we lose them again? We should go back to where we saw the truck and follow the trail ourselves." "That's crazy, Marissa," David countered, keeping his voice low. "The police have resources and training that we don't. Besides, Detective Holbrook knows how to do his job." "Does he?" Marissa questioned, a hint of bitterness creeping into her voice. "It's been 20 years, David. 20 years, and they found nothing. It took a random hiker with a dog to find that suitcase in the desert, and it wasn't even buried deeply. What does that tell you about how thorough the police have been?" David reached across the table to take her hand. "I understand your frustration, believe me. But rushing off into the desert on our own won't help April and Amber. It could make things worse." The waitress returned with their food, setting the plates down with practiced efficiency. "Here you go. Can I get you anything else?" "No, thank you," David replied, offering a polite smile. As the waitress tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, Marissa froze, her attention caught by a flash of silver on the woman's earlobe. It was an earring, a small star with a red gem at its center, identical to the one they had found in the desert, identical to the one she had given her daughters for their 13th birthday. "Excuse me," Marissa said, her voice strained. "That earring you're wearing, could I ask where you got it?" The waitress seemed surprised by the question, but not alarmed. She touched the earring self-consciously. "This old thing? A customer gave it to me years ago. Said it matched." My eyes. She smiled at the memory. "It's missing its pair, though. The man said it got lost somewhere along the way. But let me keep one of the pair if I wanted." David, who had followed Marissa's gaze, now stared at the earring with the same stunned recognition. "Was the customer a local?" he asked, trying to keep his tone casual. The waitress considered the question. "Not sure if he lives around here, but I've seen him come in from time to time over the years. He's a real gentleman, always. Leaves a good tip." She gestured toward a corkboard on the wall behind them, covered with photographs. "He's on our customer wall somewhere." "Thank you," Marissa managed, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Your earring is lovely." With a smile and a nod, the waitress left to tend to her other tables. David and Marissa turned to examine the photo wall, searching for faces that might match the men they had seen in the desert. There were dozens of pictures, tourists posing with staff, locals celebrating birthdays and anniversaries, truckers stopping for a meal on long hauls across the Southwest. "Do you see anyone familiar?" David whispered. Marissa scanned the photographs carefully. "Not yet. There are so many." Her cell phone rang suddenly, making her jump. She pulled it from her purse, seeing an unfamiliar number on the screen. Stepping away from the booth for privacy, she answered. "Hello? Mrs. Green, this is Officer Mendez from Detective Holbrook's field team." "Yes, officer. Did you find something?" "We tracked the tire marks to an abandoned shack about 5 miles from where you spotted the men," he explained. "The truck was there, abandoned." Marissa's heart raced. "And the men? No sign of them." "We searched the area thoroughly, including the shack, but they were gone. The truck was completely empty. No sack, no shovel, no personal items of any kind." Disappointment washed over her. "So they got away?" "I'm afraid so, but we've impounded the vehicle, and we're processing it for evidence. Detective Holbrook wanted you to know we're not giving up." "Thank you," Marissa said hollowly. "Please keep us updated." She ended the call and returned to the booth, where David waited expectantly. "They found the truck, abandoned near a shack," she told him, sliding back into her seat. "The men are gone." David sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "At least they have the truck. Maybe they'll find fingerprints or something." Marissa nodded, but her thoughts were elsewhere, on the waitress's earring and what it might mean. The coincidence was too great to ignore. Somehow, that earring was connected to their daughter's disappearance, and their best lead was currently serving coffee just a few feet away. Desperation clawed at Marissa's throat as she watched the waitress move among the tables, unaware of the significance of her jewelry. David was picking at his sandwich, but Marissa couldn't touch her soup. The possibility that this woman might unknowingly hold a key to finding their daughters was overwhelming. When the waitress returned to refill their coffee cups, Marissa made a decision. "I need to talk to you about something," she said, her voice low and urgent. "It might sound crazy, but please hear me out." The waitress set down the coffee pot, her expression curious but not alarmed. "Is something wrong with your food?" No, it's not that," Marissa assured her. "It's about your earring." David shot her a cautionary glance, but Marissa pressed on. "This morning, I found the matching pair to your earring in the desert," she explained, watching the waitress's face carefully. "It belongs to my daughter, who disappeared 20 years ago, along with 5 other girls from their cheerleading squad." The waitress's hand went to her earring instinctively, her eyes widening. I don't understand." "The police found their cheerleading uniforms buried in the desert today," David added gently. "And then Marissa found our daughter's earring, identical to the one you're wearing, at another site nearby where some men were digging." The waitress stood frozen, glancing between them as if trying to determine whether they were delusional or dangerous. You think this earring has something to do with your missing daughter?" "I know it sounds incredible," Marissa acknowledged, "but those earrings were a matched set. I gave them to my daughter for her 13th birthday, just months before she vanished. The odds of you having an identical earring by pure coincidence." She left the sentence unfinished. The waitress sat down heavily in the empty seat beside David, her face pale. "The man who gave this to me, I had no idea." She fell silent, thinking deeply. "Do you remember who gave it to you?" David asked softly. She nodded slowly. "I can't recall his name, but he's been here a few times over the years, though not as often recently. He's a friend of Gerald Laffinger, who lives on a ranch about 10 miles from here." "Gerald Laffinger?" Marissa repeated, committing the name to memory. "He's a catering customer," the waitress explained. "The diner delivers meals to his ranch every day. In fact," she checked her watch, "I'm due to make his delivery in about 20 minutes. Marissa and David exchanged meaningful glances. "I don't know if I can trust you," the waitress continued, her voice wavering slightly. "Giving out customer information could cost me my job, and jobs aren't easy to come by out here." "We understand," Marissa assured her. "But if these men have information about our daughters, about what happened to them, wouldn't you want to help?" The waitress considered this, then made a decision. "Look, I can't give you his address directly, but I deliver his order in 20 minutes. If you happen to follow me, well, I can't control who drives on public roads, can I?" Relief flooded through Marissa. "Thank you. You have no idea what this means to us." "Just promise me something," the waitress said, standing up. "If anything happens, don't mention my name. This is the only job I've got." "We promise," David said solemnly. The waitress nodded and returned to the kitchen, leaving Marissa and David to quickly finish their meals and pay the bill. As they walked back to their car, David spotted a familiar figure at the gas station across the street, Chris Delaney, filling the tank of his pickup truck while Dusty watched from the passenger seat. Before they could approach him, the diner's side door opened and the waitress emerged, loading several large insulated bags onto the back of a small delivery motorcycle. She caught Marissa's eye briefly, then looked away as she secured the bags and climbed onto the bike. "Let's go," Marissa whispered, sliding into the passenger seat of their car. David started the engine and waited until the waitress pulled out onto the road before following at a discreet distance. They drove in tense silence, the desert stretching endlessly on either side of the road. After about 15 minutes, the waitress turned onto a dirt road marked by a weathered wooden sign that read, "Laffinger Ranch, Private Property." David continued past the turnoff, then pulled over once they were out of sight. "Now what?" he asked. "We wait until she leaves, then we approach the gate," Marissa decided. "We'll ask to speak with Gerald Laffinger about his friend Matthew, the man who gave the waitress Amber's earring." But that's risky, Marissa. I don't think we should do that. Maybe for today we just observe. At least we know where his property is and we can pass that along to the police. They reversed and parked on a small rise that offered a view of the ranch's entrance without being too conspicuous. The property was surrounded by a high wrought iron fence, with security cameras mounted on the gateposts. Beyond the fence, they could see several buildings, a large main house, a couple of smaller structures that might be guest houses, and what looked like horse stables in the distance. The waitress had parked her motorcycle by the gate and was handing over the catering order to a security guard. The size of the delivery suggested it was meant to feed many people, far more than a single ranch owner would need. What kind of ranch needs catering for dozens of people every day? David wondered aloud. Maybe he has a lot of ranch hands, Marissa suggested, though she shared his suspicion that something unusual was happening on Laffinger's property. After several minutes, the waitress retrieved her empty delivery bags and climbed back onto her motorcycle. They watched as she drove away, disappearing down the dirt road in a cloud of dust. "Should we call Detective Holbrook?" David asked, his hand hovering over his phone. Marissa considered this. "We don't have any concrete evidence that this Laffinger person is connected to the girl's disappearance, just a chain of coincidences. I'm not sure the detective would drop everything to investigate based on that." As they weighed their next move, the gate to the ranch creaked open, and a blue Jeep rolled out. Inside were 3 men. Marissa immediately recognized them by their clothes and hats as the same ones they had seen earlier in the desert. "That's them," she hissed, ducking down in her seat. David tensed as the Jeep approached, driving past their parked car and onto the main road. For a brief moment as the vehicles passed each other, Marissa made eye contact with one of the men in the back seat. "They saw us," she whispered, her heart pounding. "We need to leave now." David started the engine and pulled back onto the road, heading away from the ranch. In the rearview mirror he could see the Jeep slowing, then making a U-turn to follow them. "They're coming after us," he said, his voice tight with fear. Marissa twisted in her seat to look behind them. The Jeep was gaining speed, clearly, intending to catch up with them. "Drive faster." David pressed the accelerator, but their car was no match for the Jeep on the rough desert road. Within minutes, the Jeep had caught up and swerved in front of them, forcing David to slam on the brakes to avoid a collision. The Jeep's doors opened, and the 3 men stepped out. Simultaneously, 2 more vehicles emerged from the ranch, gate in the distance, speeding toward them. "David," Marissa breathed, fear clutching at her throat. "What do we do?" But it was too late for escape. The men surrounded their car, one of them gesturing for them to roll down the windows. "Get out of the car," he ordered, his voice leaving no room for argument. With no choice, Marissa and David complied, stepping out into the hot desert air with their hands raised. "Who are you and why are you watching the ranch?" another man demanded. Marissa straightened her spine, finding courage in her desperation. "My name is Marissa Green. This is my husband, David. We're looking for our daughters who disappeared 20 years ago. We have reason to believe someone at this ranch might have information about them." The men exchanged glances. Then the first man spoke into a radio clipped to his shirt. "We have the couple from the desert. They say they're looking for missing daughters, awaiting instructions." After a moment, a voice crackled through the radio. "Bring them in." Surrounded by the men with no chance of escape, Marissa and David were escorted into one of the newly arrived vehicles and driven through the gates of Laffinger Ranch. Their search for answers had led them straight into what might be the lion's den, and Marissa couldn't decide whether to feel terrified or hopeful at the prospect of finally discovering the truth about what happened to their daughters. The interior of Laffinger Ranch was immaculately maintained, with manicured lawns surrounding the main house and carefully tended flower beds lining the driveway. It looked like any other wealthy person's retreat, peaceful, orderly, with no hint of the darkness Marissa suspected lurked beneath the surface. They were led into the main house through a side entrance and down a hallway decorated with expensive Western art. The men brought them to an empty room that appeared to be some kind of study, with bookshelves along one wall and a large desk dominating the space. The windows offered a view of the distant mountains, the beauty of the landscape a stark contrast to the fear Marissa felt. "Wait here," one of the men ordered before searching them and confiscating their personal items, including their phones, wallets, and car keys. Then, without another word, they left the room and shut the door behind them. David immediately tried the door, but it was locked. "They've trapped us," he said, his voice tight with anxiety. "We should have called Detective Holbrook." "It's too late for that now," Marissa replied, searching the room for anything that might help them. The desk drawers were locked, and there was nothing within reach that could serve as a weapon. "What do they want with us?" David wondered, pacing nervously. "If they're involved in the girl's disappearance, why not just get rid of us out in the desert? Why bring us here?" Marissa shook her head. "I don't know, but they must have a reason." They fell silent as footsteps approached the door. It swung open to reveal a stocky man in his 60s, dressed in an expensive tailored suit despite the desert heat. His silver hair was neatly styled, and he wore a heavy gold watch on his wrist, a display of wealth and power. "Mr. and Mrs. Green," he greeted them, his voice smooth and cultured. "I'm Gerald Laffinger. I understand you've been asking about me." "Where are our daughters?" Marissa demanded, stepping forward. "Please, have you seen them?" Laffinger raised an eyebrow, seemingly amused by her directness. "Straight to the point, I see. But I'm curious. What brings an aging couple to my property spying on my men? My security team tells me they saw you earlier today in the desert, watching them from a distance. Now you show up here. Care to explain?" David placed a steadying hand on Marissa's arm. "We found evidence that connects your ranch to our daughter's disappearance 20 years ago," he said evenly. "A cheerleading uniform buried in the desert, an earring that belongs to our daughter Amber, which your friend gave to a waitress at the diner, and a truck with the CPF logo on it," Marissa added. "Caraway Performance and Fitness, the company that used to sponsor our daughter's cheerleading team." Laffinger's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or weariness. "You've been busy," he acknowledged, "but I'm afraid you've stumbled into something you don't understand." "Then, explain it to us," Marissa challenged. "Tell us what happened to our daughters." Laffinger sat on the edge of the desk, studying them with calculating eyes. "Information has a very expensive price, Mrs. Green, and I'm not sure it's my place to make the explanation you seek." "What price?" Marissa asked desperately. "We'll pay anything. Just tell us where April and Amber are." A cold smile spread across Laffinger's face. "It's not about money, but since you've learned too much already, I don't have many options left." He stood and moved to the door, opening it to reveal the 3 men waiting outside. "Take them to the special accommodations. If they want to see the women, make sure they're comfortable. They'll be staying with us for quite some time." "But, sir, are you sure?" one of the men asked hesitantly. "Yes," he replied, coldly. "I'll let that old dancing man decide what to do with them." "You can't do this," David protested as the men entered and took hold of their arms. "People will look for us. The police know we were following a lead." "The police?" Laffinger laughed dismissively. "Don't worry about them. It's easy to stage an accident in the desert. Car goes off the road, gas tank ruptures. Very tragic. No one will come looking for you here." Despite their struggles and protests, Marissa and David were forcibly led from the house, across a stretch of open yard, and toward a large horse barn in the distance. Inside, the barn appeared normal at first glance. Stalls for horses, storage, for feed and equipment. But the men led them to what looked like a supply closet at the rear of the building. One of them opened the door to reveal a staircase leading down into darkness. "Move," he ordered, shoving David forward. They descended the stairs, the air growing cooler and damper with each step. At the bottom was another door, this one made of heavy metal with a complex electronic lock. The man punched in a code and the door swung open to reveal what could only be described as an underground bunker. The space was surprisingly large, with concrete walls and floors and fluorescent lights humming overhead. There were several cots against one wall, a small bathroom area sectioned off by a partial wall, and a basic kitchenette in one corner. But what drew Marissa's attention immediately were the 3 women sitting on the cots, watching their entrance with wary, haunted eyes. The men forced Marissa and David to their knees in the center of the room, binding their hands to a metal pipe that ran from floor to ceiling. With that, they turned and left, the heavy door closing behind them with a resounding thud that echoed through the silence. For a moment, there was silence as Marissa and David struggled to process what they were seeing. The women appeared to be in their early 30s, the age their daughters would be now. They were thin, with pale skin that suggested they rarely saw the sun, but they were clean and appeared physically unharmed, though their eyes told a different story. "Who are you?" one of the women asked finally, her voice soft and hesitant. Before either of them could answer, heavy footsteps descended the stairs outside, and the door opened again to admit Gerald Laffinger. He surveyed the scene with satisfaction. "This is what I meant by the expensive price for information," he told Marissa and David. "Now you'll have all the time in the world to learn the truth, as you spend the rest of your lives in this cozy little bunker with the survivors." "Survivors," David repeated, his voice breaking on the word. Laffinger ignored him, turning to address the women. "Ladies, meet your new roommates. I'm sure you'll have plenty to talk about." He moved back toward the door, pausing as he reached it. "Oh, and don't get any ideas about helping them escape. You remember what happened last time someone tried that, don't you?" The women visibly flinched at his words, one of them looking away as if to hide tears. Laffinger left, the door closing behind him with the sound of multiple locks engaging. As his footsteps receded up the stairs, Marissa could hear him speaking to someone, his voice raised in anger. "That damn dancing man," he muttered. "Get me a phone call with Matthew and Caraway. Let's just hope Caraway is not talking to police to save his own ass." The name sent a jolt through Marissa. Vincent Caraway, the cheerleading coach. He was involved after all. Once Laffinger was gone, Marissa turned her attention back to the women, hope and fear warring within her. "Please," she said, her voice trembling, "help us untie these ropes." The women exchanged uncertain glances. Then one of them stood and approached, turning to show her back as she did so. Her thin shirt didn't hide the lattice of scars that crisscrossed her skin, evidence of repeated whipping or beatings. "This is what happens when we don't follow the rules," she explained quietly. "If we help you, they'll do worse." Marissa gasped in horror at the sight. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "But please, we're looking for our daughters, April and Amber Green. They disappeared 20 years ago with their cheerleading squad. Do you know them?" The woman froze, her eyes widening in apparent recognition. She turned slowly to face Marissa, studying her features closely. "Mom," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Dad." Marissa's heart seemed to stop. "April, Amber," the woman swallowed hard. "I'm April," she confirmed, tears filling her eyes. David made a choked sound beside Marissa, straining against his bonds. "April," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "Oh my God, we found you." April hesitated, then knelt down and began working at the knots that bound their hands, her movements quick but cautious. "We can't make noise," she warned, in a whisper. "They monitor this room sometimes." As she worked, Marissa drank in the sight of her daughter. A woman now, her face showing the strain of whatever horror she had endured, but still recognizably the child they had lost. "What happened to you?" she asked, tears streaming down her face. "Where's Amber?" April paused, pain flashing across her features. "Only 3 of us survived," she said softly. "Me, Kira Thompson, and Hannah Lee." She nodded, toward the other 2 women, who watched the reunion with a mixture of hope and caution. "Rachel died from complications of a sexually transmitted infection a few years ago. They wouldn't get her proper medical care." Marissa closed her eyes briefly, absorbing the horror of what her daughter was telling her. "And Amber?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer. April's hands trembled as she continued working on the knots. "Amber and Lily were killed for trying to organize an escape with the rest of us. That was the last time any of us tried to get away. They made us watch, to teach us a lesson." A sob escaped Marissa's throat. The pain of knowing her other daughter had been murdered nearly unbearable. David was weeping openly beside her, his shoulders shaking with grief. "I'm so sorry," April whispered, finally freeing Marissa's hands. I never thought I'd see you again. What are you doing here? How did you find us? As April moved to untie David, Marissa explained about the suitcase found in the desert, the earring, and how they had followed the waitress to the ranch. The police know we were following a lead, she assured her daughter. They'll come looking for us when we don't return. April shook her head, her expression bleak. Mom, if they're as good at covering their tracks as they have been for 20 years, no one will find us here. This bunker is soundproofed. We've screamed and shouted for help 1,000 times. No one ever hears. David, now free, pulled April into a tight embrace. We're not giving up, he promised. We'll find a way out of here. Kira and Hannah approached cautiously, introduced themselves, and Marissa hugged them both, thinking of their parents, who had waited so long for answers. Your parents never stopped looking for you, she told them. None of us did. Who did this to you? David asked, his grief transforming into anger. Who took you? Kira spoke up, her voice stronger than April's. It was Coach Caraway. He and his men drugged us after the competition and brought us here. Laffinger owns this place, but Caraway is the one who uses us. And there's another man, Hannah added. Matthew Rands. He handles the logistics for Caraway's company. Everyone thinks he's the owner, but it's really still Laffinger behind everything. They just use Matthew as a front. Marissa remembered what Detective Holbrook had said about Caraway selling his company 20 years ago. So Caraway lied about selling the company, she realized. He just put it in Matthew's name to distance himself from it in case anyone got suspicious. April nodded. Caraway visits once a month, but otherwise we just stay down. Here, no one is allowed to touch us except him, not even Laffinger or Matthew. We're his special girls, he says. The horror of their situation was overwhelming as hours passed by. Just as they began to gather the courage to talk about escape, distant noises echoed from above, shouting and what sounded like gunshots. April rushed to help David find something they could use to signal their presence, settling on a metal food tray that he began banging against the pipe they had been tied to. The noise was deafening in the confined space, and they took turns banging rhythmically and shouting for help. Despite April's insistence that the bunker was soundproof, they had to try. Minutes that felt like hours passed, the gunfire above eventually falling silent. Then, miraculously, they heard movement on the stairs, followed by voices calling out, "Police! Is anyone down there?" Hope surged through Marissa as they all shouted back, directing the rescuers to the locked door. After several tense moments, the electronic lock disengaged, and the door swung open to reveal several police officers in tactical gear, weapons drawn. One of them held up an electronic car key, likely taken from the men who had captured them. "We need medical assistance?" one officer called into his radio as they assessed the situation. "We have 5 civilians, appears to be the missing persons and 2 others." As they were led up the stairs and out of the barn, Marissa held tightly to April's hand, afraid that if she let go, her daughter might disappear again. Outside, the ranch was swarming with police vehicles and ambulances. Several bodies lay on the ground, covered with sheets, men who had resisted arrest and been shot by police. Near the main house, Marissa spotted Detective Holbrook coordinating the operation. Beside him stood Chris Delaney and the waitress from the diner, both looking relieved at the sight of Marissa and David emerging safely. Gerald Laffinger and the 3 men from the desert were being loaded into separate police cruisers, handcuffed and under heavy guard. "Detective," Marissa called out, her voice breaking with emotion. "We found them. We found our daughter, April and Kira and Hannah too. But the others didn't make it." Detective Holbrook approached quickly, his expression a mixture of shock and relief. "Mrs. Green, Mr. Green, are you all right? We've been searching for you since the hiker and the waitress reported you missing. Vincent Caraway is behind all of this," David told him urgently. "He took the girls 20 years ago. He's been keeping them here as prisoners all this time." The detective's expression hardened. "We just interviewed Caraway at the station a few hours ago." He turned to an officer nearby. "Radio all units. Priority 1, locate and apprehend Vincent Caraway. Consider him dangerous. Block all exits from town and check his residence immediately. As paramedics approached to check them for injuries, Marissa felt a complex mixture of emotions. Joy at finding April alive, devastating grief for Amber, and a burning determination to see justice done. They had found some answers, but the full truth of what had happened to their daughters and the other girls was still emerging, a truth more horrific than they could have imagined. The police station buzzed with activity. Additional officers had been called in to handle the unfolding case, and reporters were gathering outside, alerted by scanner chatter about a major break in the 20-year-old disappearance that had haunted Chandler for 2 decades. Marissa, David, and April sat together in a small interview room, unwilling to be separated even for a moment. April held her parents' hands tightly, as if afraid they might vanish if she let go. Across the hall, Kira and Hannah were giving their statements to other officers, each accompanied by a victim advocate. Detective Holbrook entered, carrying a tray with cups of water and a box of tissues. His face showed the strain of the past several hours, but there was a determined set to his jaw. "We've got roadblocks up on all major routes out of the county," he informed them. "Caraway won't get far." "Has he already fled?" David asked. The detective nodded grimly. "Officers found his house empty, closets cleared out. He must have bolted as soon as he left the station this morning, but we'll find him." He turned his attention to April. "I know this is difficult, but we need to understand exactly what happened, both 20 years ago and since then. Are you up for answering some questions?" April took a deep breath and nodded. "I want to tell you everything. I want him caught and punished for what he did to us." To my sister, Detective Holbrook activated a recording device and placed it on the table. "For the record, could you state your full name?" "April Michelle Green," she replied, her voice stronger than it had been in the bunker. "I was abducted on May 17, 1995, along with my twin sister Amber and 4 other girls from our cheerleading squad." "Can you tell us what happened that night?" April closed her eyes briefly, gathering her thoughts. "We had just finished competing in a regional championship. We placed second. Everyone was celebrating in the locker room, getting changed to go home." She paused, swallowing hard before continuing. "Coach Caraway asked Rachel Collins to stay behind to discuss her performance. The rest of us went to the convenience store across the street to get sodas. When we came back, we walked in on Coach Caraway touching Rachel inappropriately in the storage room." Marissa squeezed her daughter's hand supportively as April continued. "Rachel was crying, but Coach kept telling her it was okay, that she was special, that he was going to make her a star if she became his soul wife. That's what he called it, his soul wife. When he saw us standing there, he tried to play it off, said Rachel was upset about a mistake in her routine, and he was comforting her." "What happened then?" Detective Holbrook prompted gently when April fell silent. "We knew something was wrong. Lily Rivera said we should tell our parents or the school principal. Coach got really angry. He left the room and we thought he was going to try to talk his way out of it, but instead he came back with 3 men, the same ones who were at the ranch. They had syringes." Her voice broke, and she took a moment to compose herself. "They injected us with something. I remember feeling dizzy, then nothing until I woke up in that bunker. All 6 of us were there. Rachel told us that Coach had been inappropriate with her for months. She wasn't the only one. He'd targeted several girls on the squad, promising them special training and future careers if they would be his soul wives. Some of them agreed because they believed his promises about making them professional cheerleaders." "And after your abduction?" the detective asked. April's grip on her parents' hands tightened. "At first we thought we'd be rescued quickly. We knew our parents would be looking for us, that the police would be searching. But days turned into weeks, then months, then years." She described how Caraway would visit the bunker regularly, selecting one of the girls to serve him during his stays. How Laffinger and Matthew Rands managed the day-to-day operations of their captivity, providing food and basic necessities but keeping them isolated from the outside world. "Rachel got sick about 5 years ago," April continued, her voice hollow. "She had infections, fevers. We begged them to take her to a doctor, but they wouldn't. They gave her some antibiotics, but it wasn't enough. She died down there without ever seeing her family again." Marissa wiped tears from her eyes, thinking of Susan Collins, who would never see her daughter alive again. "And Amber?" Detective Holbrook asked gently. "What happened to her and Lily?" April took a shuddering breath. "About 3 years ago, we planned an escape. Amber had managed to steal a key card from one of the guards during a moment when he was distracted. We waited until the middle of the night, when we thought everyone would be asleep." Her voice faltered, and David put his arm around her shoulders. "We almost made it out of the barn," she whispered. "But the alarm went off. Guards came from everywhere. Amber and Lily were in front. They were caught first. Caraway was furious. He said he needed to make an example to ensure our continued obedience. She couldn't continue, overcome by the memory of what had happened to her twin sister." Detective Holbrook waited patiently, allowing her the time she needed. "He killed them," April finally managed. "Made us watch as he strangled them. Said if any of us tried to escape again, the same would happen. After that, we knew there was no hope. We just tried to survive, day by day." The detective's face was grim as he made notes. "And the ranch, what was it used for besides holding you captive?" "Money laundering, I think," April replied. "We overheard conversations sometimes. Caraway's company, CPF, was a front for something bigger. They talked about shipments, distribution routes. I think they were involved in drug trafficking." "That would explain the catering deliveries," David mused. "Food for workers involved in the operation." Detective Holbrook nodded. "We'll investigate those angles thoroughly. The FBI is on their way. This crosses into their jurisdiction with the trafficking and kidnapping elements." He turned back to April. "You mentioned the earrings earlier, the ones your mother gave you and Amber for your birthday. Do you know how one of them ended up with the waitress at the diner?" April nodded. "Matthew Rands took them from Amber after she was killed. I heard him tell one of the guards he thought they were pretty. Later, I overheard him boasting about giving one to that cute waitress at the diner. He kept the other one as a sort of trophy. And the cheerleading uniforms. Why were they buried in the desert recently after all this time? I'm not sure," April admitted. "But a few weeks ago, there was an argument between Caraway and Laffinger. Caraway wanted to get rid of evidence, things that could connect him to us if they were ever found. He told Laffinger to handle it. Maybe that's when they decided to hide the uniforms, but Laffinger's men were reckless. They always thought the desert could hide anything." As the interview continued, more details emerged about the horrific captivity the young women had endured for 20 years. By the time they finished, the sky outside had darkened, and Detective Holbrook looked exhausted but determined. "We'll need more statements over the coming days," he told them. "But you've given us enough to work with for now. The FBI will want to speak with you as well." "What happens now?" Marissa asked, her arms still around April's shoulders protectively. "First, we need to get you all checked out at the hospital," he replied. "Then we'll arrange safe accommodations. This case is going to attract a lot of media attention, and we need to protect your privacy while the investigation continues." Just then, another officer appeared at the door, beckoning urgently to Detective Holbrook. He excused himself and stepped outside. Through the glass panel of the door, they could see him receiving what appeared to be important news, his expression changing from concern to grim satisfaction. He returned a moment later. "We've got him," he announced. "Highway Patrol stopped Caraway trying to cross into New Mexico about 30 minutes ago. He's being transported back to Chandler as we speak." Relief flooded through Marissa. The monster who had stolen their daughters, who had murdered Amber, would finally face justice. It wouldn't bring back the dead, but it was a start. "There's something else," Detective Holbrook added. "The team has already begun processing the ranch. They've found financial records linking Caraway, Laffinger, and Matthew Rands to an extensive drug trafficking operation. The ranch, cheerleading, and fitness business was just a cover." April nodded wearily. "I always suspected something like that. The men who brought our food sometimes talked about shipments and deliveries that had nothing to do with us." As they prepared to leave for the hospital, the door opened again to reveal the waitress from the diner, escorted by an officer. She approached hesitantly, her eyes red from crying. "I'm so sorry," she said to Marissa and David. "If I had known what that earring meant, who those men really were." You helped save our daughter, Marissa assured her, rising to embrace the woman. We can never thank you enough for that. The waitress reached into her pocket and withdrew the earring she had been wearing. This belongs to your family, she said, placing it in Marissa's palm. I don't deserve to keep it. Marissa closed her fingers around the small silver star, thinking of its pair that had led them to April. Such a tiny thing to have played such a crucial role in solving a 20-year mystery. Thank you, she whispered. The officer who had accompanied the waitress spoke up. The hiker, Mr. Delaney, wanted me to tell you he's glad you're safe. He's the one who noticed you were missing and alerted us. He and the waitress realized you might have followed her to Laffinger Ranch and came to the station together. Marissa made a mental note to thank Chris Delaney properly when she had the chance. Without his discovery of the suitcase and his subsequent concern for their safety, they might never have found April. As they left the interview room, they passed open doors where other reunions were taking place. Kira with her parents, Linda, and Robert, who were sobbing with joy as they embraced their long-lost daughter. Hannah with her father, Michael, her mother Judith, having passed away 3 years earlier, never knowing her daughter was alive. In the main area of the station, Marissa spotted Susan Collins and the Riveras, being gently informed by officers that their daughters had not survived. Their anguished cries cut through the bustling activity of the station, a stark reminder that even in this moment of partial triumph, there was still profound loss. April paused, watching them with tears in her eyes. I wish I could have saved them, she whispered. Rachel, Amber, Lily. They deserve to come home too. You survived, David told her gently. You kept the truth alive. Because of you, their stories will be told, and the men responsible will pay for what they did. Marissa pulled her daughter close, savoring the miracle of having her in her arms again after 20 years of emptiness. The road ahead would not be easy. April and the other survivors had years of trauma to process, and the family had to learn how to live with both the joy of April's return and the confirmed loss of Amber. But for now, in this moment, they were together. It was more than Marissa had dared to hope for when she awoke that morning to a phone call from Detective Holbrook. A chapter of their lives that had remained painfully unfinished for 2 decades was finally reaching its conclusion, making way for whatever came next.